The top of the skyscraper in Manhattan gleamed like a cut diamond under the cold moonlight. But inside the glass penthouse, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive perfumes and icy indifference. Waiters in impeccable suits glided silently among tycoons and celebrities flaunting jewels whose value could feed entire cities, while rain pounded violently against the massive transparent panels, creating a brutal contrast between absolute comfort and the storm raging outside. Arthur, the tech, billionaire known as the Iceman, observed the scene with a distant gaze, holding a crystal glass that seemed to merge with his impassive expression and perfectly tailored suit. He was hosting a charity gala, an event designed to raise millions, but his heart was as empty as the charitable promises made by guests who barely knew the name of the cause they were funding that night of luxury. Suddenly, the side service door burst open with a loud crash, and silence began to spread across the hall, like an oil stain in clean water, as all eyes turned toward a figure that did not belong in that environment. In the middle of the velvet red carpet, a small child, his face smeared with soot and his clothes 3 sizes too big for his frail body, walked forward with unsteady steps, leaving trails of mud and grease on the expensive silk floor. The boy, who appeared to be no more than 8 years old, clutched a twisted metal object against his chest, completely ignoring the security guards, who, initially frozen by the audacity of the intrusion, were now moving quickly to remove him. The intense glow of the crystal chandeliers reflected off the dirt on the child's face, highlighting his large, watery eyes as they desperately searched for something or someone within that sea of strange, hostile faces. Arthur was standing at the center of the stage, moments away from beginning his annual speech on future investments, when his eyes met those of the small intruder, and for a brief second, the world seemed to stop spinning. The boy climbed the first step of the platform, extending the broken metal toy with trembling hands, revealing a deep, jagged scar crossing the palm of his left hand, identical to the mark Arthur carried hidden beneath the cuff of his designer shirt. The magnate's breath caught in his throat as he recognized not only the scar, but the exact model of the twisted little car, an iron replica of the same vehicle he had been driving on the night his life shattered in a fatal accident years earlier. The shock was so visceral that the microphone in his hand emitted a sharp burst of feedback, echoing the silent pain he had tried to bury for more than a decade. "You're the man who builds everything. Can you fix the engine?" The child's voice was small, yet it sliced through the murmur of New York's elite like a sharpened blade, carrying a hope Arthur had not felt in ages. The boy was not asking for food, money, or shelter. He was asking for the restoration of a symbol of loss, firmly believing that this giant of steel and glass possessed the divine power to repair what was dead. The security guards finally reached the stage, gripping the boy by his thin shoulders to drag him away, but Arthur raised his hand in a sharp gesture, ordering them to stop immediately as the hall plunged into a deafening silence. There, before hundreds of cameras and high society, the Iceman felt the first crack form in his billion-dollar armor, confronted by a ghost of the past dressed in the purity of misery. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Arthur's past was a labyrinth of codes and algorithms he had built to isolate the pain of a memory that never left him, the sound of metal twisting, and the silence that followed the crash. For 10 years, he believed that financial success and distant philanthropy could compensate for the negligence of a single fatal second, when a message on his phone cost the life of his only son. He turned himself into a business automaton, someone who signed 7-figure checks for orphanages but refused to visit a single crib, fearing that a child's gaze might pierce his facade of efficiency. The luxury of his penthouse was, in truth, a gilded cell where he processed data and profits so he wouldn't have to process grief, treating human life as a statistical variable that required only resources, never presence or genuine affection. Leo, on the other hand, lived in a reality where concrete was cold and hope was the only fuel available to survive the freezing nights beneath the city's overpasses. The boy had fled a government shelter where neglect was the rule, carrying with him only the oversized clothes he found in the trash and the small metal toy car that had belonged to his older brother. To Leo, that toy was not just an object, but a sacred link to the only person who had ever loved him, and his childlike mind believed that if the engine started turning again, the connection to the past would be restored. He saw in Arthur not a powerful billionaire, but a machine wizard, someone the news claimed could create technological wonders, and that blind faith drove him to breach the elite's maximum security. The connection between the two began to solidify through their shared focus on the toy, while the gala guests whispered acidic criticisms about the breach of protocol and the child's deplorable appearance. Arthur ignored the social murmur and the disapproving looks from his partners, focusing only on Leo's small, calloused hand, holding the medal with near-religious reverence. "Where did you get this, kid?" Arthur asked, his usually steady voice now wavering at a frequency of vulnerability he had not recognized in himself for a very long time. Leo answered with devastating simplicity, explaining that the car was the only thing left of his family and that he needed it to work so the emptiness in his chest wouldn't hurt so much during the lonely nights. The dialogue between the richest man in the room and the poorest child in the city became the center of an unplanned spectacle, where words were few but carried unbearable emotional weight. Arthur explained that engines were easy to understand, but life rarely offered spare parts for what truly mattered, awkwardly trying to shield Leo from the disappointment to come. Yet the boy's persistence was unshakable. He described the sound the car used to make before it broke, as if he were recounting the melody of a happy life stolen too soon. With every detail Leo shared about his escapes and how he slept clutching the toy, Arthur felt the walls of ice protecting his heart being torn down by a force money could never buy. The tension escalated when Arthur's head of security tried to intervene again, claiming the boy could pose a risk or that the situation was damaging the public image of the tech company. Arthur felt a surge of genuine anger, not at the interruption, but at the bureaucratic coldness he himself had embodied just minutes earlier, realizing how grotesque it was to prioritize image over soul. He ordered everyone to step back, forming a protective circle around Leo, as the boy's fear slowly gave way to cautious curiosity about the man in the dark suit. The visual contrast was striking. The sparkle of diamonds on nearby tables seemed dull compared to the light emanating from the genuine human connection beginning to grow amid the ruins of two deeply painful pasts. External obstacles began to surface almost immediately as Arthur's fiancée, a woman driven by status and appearances, approached to contain the damage and pull the magnate away from the humiliating situation. She argued that the press would feast on such a display of weakness, but Arthur seemed not to hear her, focused only on Leo's shallow breathing, a sign of deep physical exhaustion. Arthur's internal fear, the trauma of being unable to protect those he loves, resurfaced at full force, but this time it did not paralyze him. Instead, it ignited a fierce determination not to fail this child. He realized that the bureaucracy of the adoption system and rigid social norms would be colossal barriers, but the urgency in Leo's eyes was a call he could no longer ignore. The emotional bond deepened when Arthur, disregarding protocol, gently touched the scar on Leo's hand, feeling the rough skin marked by the suffering of the streets and abandonment. He told Leo, in a whisper only the two of them could hear, that he had the same mark, and that for a long time he believed it was a sign of an ending, not a beginning. Leo smiled for the first time, a small gesture that lit up his grease-stained face, and said that scars were like roads that show where you've been, so you don't get lost. That childlike wisdom, forged in pain and survival, struck Arthur like a physical blow, forcing him to confront his own cowardice in hiding for years behind mountains of gold and influence. The luxurious penthouse began to feel claustrophobic to Arthur, who now saw the emptiness of conversations about profits and market expansion, while a life pulsed for help right in front of him. He started asking practical questions about where Leo lived, but the boy's answers revealed a landscape of neglect and danger that made the magnate's stomach churn with indignation. The emotional bond was sealed. Arthur no longer saw a charity project, but an opportunity for personal redemption the universe was placing in his hands on a soot-stained silver platter. The connection was not built on pity, but on a mutual recognition of loss, transforming two strangers into mirrors of the same pain, desperately seeking some form of balm. Gradually, the tension in the hall shifted from curiosity to harsh judgment, as Arthur's partners began exchanging worried messages about the mental stability of their primary leader and technological visionary. They saw a psychotic break. Arthur saw his first epiphany in decades, a moment of absolute clarity in which life's priorities were reordered under the weight of a request for repair. Arthur's trauma, which once drove him to flee from children, now anchored him to the ground, preventing him from walking away from that small being who carried the same weight of a broken world. The atmosphere of wealth-driven celebration had transformed into a silent courtroom, where a man's humanity was being tested against the unquestionable purity of a vulnerable child. Leo began to cough, a dry, deep sound that echoed through the hall, revealing that his health was far more fragile than his brave posture had suggested during his triumphant entrance. Arthur felt a tightening in his chest, a dark premonition that time was a luxury neither of them possessed in abundance, and that the healing required had to be immediate and profound. He realized that the social criticism and bureaucratic obstacles that would follow were nothing more than background noise compared to the battle for life Leo was silently fighting with every labored breath. The fear of failing again, of watching another life fade under his watch, became the engine that would drive his actions from that decisive moment in the heart of Manhattan. The emotional connection between them crossed the boundary of reason, reaching a level of understanding that required no long explanations or complex justifications for why they were there. Leo trusted Arthur with the total surrender of someone who had nothing left to lose, and Arthur accepted that trust as the most important mission of his billionaire existence. Leo's suffering, visible in every detail of his pale skin and his broken toy, became the fuel that finally pushed Arthur to confront the ghosts that had haunted him since the night of the fatal accident. They were now two survivors in a sea of luxury, clinging to each other as waves of reality began to crash against the glass walls of the penthouse. At the climax of this turning point, Arthur took Leo's hand and led him away from the judging eyes, deciding that the gala was over and that a new chapter of his life had begun. He no longer cared about the company's stock potentially crashing the next day or the billion-dollar contracts that might be canceled because of his erratic and unprofessional behavior. What mattered was the warmth of Leo's hand and the silent promise that this time he would not let the car stop. No matter how broken the engine might seem. Leo's journey of suffering had finally found a safe harbor, while Arthur's journey of solitude found a purpose that gold had never been able to provide. The silence that fell over the Manhattan penthouse was so dense that the sound of rain felt like a distant roar compared to the scene unfolding at the center of the room. Arthur, the man whose shoes cost more than the homes of many families, slowly knelt on the cold marble floor, allowing the grease from the toy and the mud on Leo's clothes to permanently stain his $10,000 suit. His hands, once used to signing deals that reshaped the global economy, now visibly trembled as he tried, with almost desperate tenderness, to fit the metal wheels of the twisted little car back into place. "I spent 10 years trying to fix what can't be undone, trying to rebuild a past that fire took away," Arthur shouted to the crowd of partners and onlookers attempting to intervene. "Please let me fix something that can still roll." Arthur's fiancée stepped forward, gripping his arm with a force that blended shame and authority, whispering that he was destroying his reputation in front of the country's most powerful investors over a momentary delusion. Arthur looked at her with red, tear-filled eyes, an expression no one in that room had ever seen on the face of the Iceman, and pulled free from her grasp with an unshakable resolve that ended any further argument. He turned back to Leo, who watched him with an expectation so pure it seemed to radiate a warmth capable of melting the cynicism of everyone around them, and promised that not only would the toy be restored, but that Leo would never have to walk alone again. Arthur's sobs broke free uncontrollably, a release of decades of suffocated guilt finally finding its way out through that improbable and transformative encounter. The moment reached its peak when police officers and social services entered the room, alerted by security about the presence of a runaway minor, forming a perimeter around the magnate and the child. Arthur stood up, still holding the metal toy car in one hand and Leo's small hand in the other, positioning his body as an unbreakable shield between the boy and the officials who embodied the system's coldness. "To take him, you'll have to go through everything I've built, because this boy is not a number in a case file. He is the reason I am still human," he declared with an authority that did not come from his bank balance, but from his newly forged identity. The transformative declaration echoed through the glass walls, making it clear that the man who had entered that party as an empty billionaire was leaving it as a father ready to fight. The emotional tension overflowed when Leo, frightened by the glare of flashlights and the crackle of police radios, clutched Arthur's suit and asked if he would also be broken like his toy if he were taken back to the shelter. Arthur knelt down, again, meeting the child at eye level, and handed him the gold watch he had inherited from his own deceased son, an object he had kept as a relic of pain and that now became a pledge of protection. "This time now belongs to you, Leo, and I promise that no one will ever take away your right to dream or to have someone hold you when you fall," he said, sealing a pact of spiritual adoption even before any legal document was written. The transformation was visible in every gesture, in the posture that had once been rigid and now bent to embrace the vulnerability of someone who had nothing to offer except his own existence. In that moment of absolute clarity, Arthur realized that his true fortune was not in technological patents or properties across the world's capitals, but in his ability to be a safe harbor for that wounded soul. He looked at his partners who were already typing notes about his instability for the press, and smiled with a freedom money had never given him, feeling the weight of guilt from the past accident finally being replaced by the responsibility of the present. The climax closed with Arthur carrying Leo in his arms out of the penthouse, ignoring camera flashes and protests from his team, while the metal toy, now firmly held in the boy's hands, shone under the city lights like a trophy from a battle won against human indifference. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. The resolution of the story materialized in a profound transformation in Arthur's life. He abandoned the coldness of his Manhattan mansion to build a true home, where Leo's colors and laughter replaced the funereal silence of his former art collections. The adoption process, though long and bureaucratic, was overcome by the tireless determination of a man who discovered that his influence and wealth finally served a sacred purpose, protecting the childhood of someone fate had forgotten. Arthur not only saved Leo from the streets, but allowed the boy to save him from his own apathy, creating a routine in which breakfast and trips to the park became more valuable than any boardroom meeting. The mansion, once a monument to ego and grief, now displayed children's drawings on its walls and the constant sound of a life flourishing against all statistical odds. The change extended beyond the walls of the home as Arthur redirected the focus of his tech giant toward assistive technologies and affordable housing, positively impacting the lives of thousands of vulnerable families. He was now frequently seen in public parks, without designer suits or a distant gaze, running alongside Leo as the boy experienced the freedom of simply being a loved and safe child. The company, once driven solely by relentless profit, became a model of social responsibility, proving that the soul of a leader can shape the culture of an entire corporation when it finds new meaning. The relationship between the two, solidified on a foundation of absolute trust, where the scar on each of their hands served as a daily reminder that pain can be the soil in which the greatest kindness grows. The ultimate symbol of that restoration rested prominently on the living room coffee table. Leo's metal toy car, now fully restored and painted gold by specialists Arthur personally hired. The toy was no longer an object of trauma or a reminder of a lost brother, but a trophy of healing, symbolizing the moment two worlds collided to create something new and beautiful. Arthur learned that real success is not what accumulates in protected bank accounts, but what one is able to restore in the hearts of others through presence and genuine care. The vision of the future for that unlikely family was now radiant, grounded in the certainty that as long as there is love and a willingness to fix what is broken, no story is ever truly lost forever. The moral of the story echoed in every action Arthur took. No billionaire. Fortune is large enough to fill the void of a heart closed to the pain of others. He found his redemption not by trying to erase the accident of the past, but by building a present where Leo's safety was his non-negotiable priority, transforming his pain into a force for good. Leo's life, once marked by soot and the cold of abandonment, now shone with the promise of a future filled with opportunity and affection, proving that human connection is the only wealth that truly survives time. The emotional ending left a clear message. Love has no price, and the ability to care for someone is the highest form of power a human being can possess. 15 years passed, and the auditorium of a prestigious engineering university was packed for the graduation ceremony. Leo, now a young man with a steady posture and bright eyes, stepped onto the stage to receive his diploma as valedictorian, wearing his gown with a pride that transcended academic achievement. He dedicated every word of his speech to Arthur, who watched from the front row, visibly aged, hair white, yet with a light in his eyes that none of his billions in stock shares had ever been able to buy. At the end of the ceremony, Leo noticed a child standing alone at the back of the hall, holding a broken object and, following his father's example, he stepped down from the stage to offer the same hand that once pulled him out of the darkness, closing the cycle of healing and passing the flame of compassion to a new generation. Have you ever done an act of kindness that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness.